In this video, I'll be revealing the Roth timing trap that destroyed over $800,000 in tax-free growth in two cases that I reviewed recently. And the worst part is they followed the exact advice that you'll find on YouTube. Through working with dozens of people who've come to me after they made some costly Roth conversion mistakes, I discovered that the advice to just convert everything to Roth or just go all Roth all the time without understanding the timing and tax coordination can eliminate hundreds of thousands in potential long-term growth. If you're new to the channel, my name is Justin. I own a financial planning firm in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, where we help retirees all across the country make smart financial decisions and help them avoid making potential Roth conversion mistakes. And that's exactly why I'm making today's video. I want to expose the conversion timing traps that can cost retirees massive amounts of tax-free wealth and show you how to avoid these potentially expensive traps. So let's get right into it. So first, let's address the generic conversion advice that creates a lot of these mistakes in the first place. And before I start to break anything down, there's so many misconceptions and strong opinions about Roth conversions versus doing it, not doing it. Part of the generic advice is that everybody should be converting to Roth, and that's not the case. Roth conversions are not a strategy that everyone should be doing. There's some critical things to narrow down. So to preface this, if you're considering a Roth conversion strategy, you should ask yourself two questions up front. Number one, do I care enough about avoiding future taxes to go through the process, mental energy doing it? For some people, the answer is no. They just don't care that much about avoiding future taxes. To them, it's just something that comes with building a good amount of wealth. They'll get to it later, not a big deal. And that's okay. However, if the answer to that question is yes, and you do care about trying to cut down future taxes, then why are you doing it? Is it just for your benefit? Is it mostly for your spouse, your kids? You need to define exactly what your motivation is for doing it, because that can determine the strategy. But then let's say you do decide to do it, then there should be clear benefits, and we want to do it right. We want to make sure you're doing it optimally. So this needs to be case by case, and there are definitely psychological and emotional angles here too that need to be considered. And so for this video, we will assume you've already covered all those bases and that you are a good candidate for Roth conversion. So that's what this video is about, avoiding the pitfalls if it is appropriate and you are implementing a Roth conversion strategy. And so I talk with retirees all the time who get generic advice, who are told online or elsewhere to just convert everything to Roth or just go all Roth. And that sounds proactive, but it's usually where the damage starts, because this is where it gets a little bit frustrating, because oversimplifying Roth and Roth conversions and convincing people that Roth is always better is not always the case. It can be reckless and can be harmful. So I've seen six-figure unnecessary tax bills simply because nobody coordinated timing with Social Security, capital gains, IRMA Medicare surcharges, upcoming RMDs, or there might just be little understanding about marginal versus effective tax rates, which I'll break down here in a little bit. And I'm not saying any of this or any part of this video to scare you. I don't like to use fear in any of my videos for education, but I think too many people use or they treat Roth as either a magic fix or a fear-based tax doomsday hedge. Neither of those are true. The truth is Roth conversions can be very, very powerful when the timing and the coordination are precise. So my video today is to build on the last one I made where we looked at the psychological and emotional side of Roth conversions. Now we're going to look at the mathematical side of what actually happens when people get the timing wrong. So the lazy generic advice is the first domino. The next trap hits even harder because it happens in the most expensive tax years of your life. And so now we'll go into the high tax conversion trap that can multiply those conversion costs. And so we'll use a case that I examined recently. We'll call him Bob. Bob is 61, married, still making strong income this year, and he thinks he's running out of time because he's been told everywhere and online that Roth is the key to retirement. He has mostly all pre-tax, so he's got to get a bunch into Roth. Doesn't really understand how it all works, so he does what the internet says. He pushes through a $120,000 conversion while he's still in a peak earning year. And what that did is shove most of his conversion into the 32% bracket, the most expensive tax bracket of his entire lifetime. If Bob had simply waited a year or a couple more years until retirement, he could have used the early retirement low income year windows instead. When he had the standard deduction plus almost zero taxable income, his effective tax rate could have easily been in the 8 to 10% range. And I'm going to show you what I mean. So converting $120,000 at 32%, he cost himself $38,400 in tax. It's all coming off the top because his lower brackets are already filled up. Versus waiting a few years and converting $120,000 at potentially around 8% effective tax rate would be $10,143 in tax. So that one timing mistake alone cost Bob a little bit over $28,000. And now you might be wondering, well, how does he get 8%? How does that all work? So I'm going to show you what I mean here. So let's say Bob is 62 when he retires, married, filing jointly, doesn't have Social Security yet, and we'll assume he has no other ordinary income because he's living off of a non-retirement or brokerage account, which can be very, very beneficial for early retirement. So technically his Roth conversion is his only income for the year. So then we take his standard deduction. His taxable income is $88,500. And then some of his income gets taxed at the 10% bracket. Some gets taxed at 12. His marginal bracket is 12%. But when you add up and you average all the brackets together, what he's actually paying in tax on his total income is about 8.45%. And that's what we mean by effective tax rate. So part is taxed at 0 because of the standard deduction. Some is taxed at 10, some is taxed at 12, but that average is the effective tax rate. And that's far more meaningful in Roth conversion planning than we're just in the 12 or 22 or 24% bracket. Because what actually matters isn't the rate on your top dollar, it's the average you actually pay on the conversion. And that's why smart Roth conversion planning focuses on effective tax rates, especially in those early retirement years when that effective tax rate can be shockingly low. So if that $28,257, for example, had instead been in the Roth and compounded at 7% for 20 years, it would have grown to roughly somewhere around $109,000 of tax-free wealth that now never gets to exist because of that mistake. And I constantly hear questions from late 50s, early 60s professionals still in peak income years asking if they should convert before retirement. And most of the time, the answer is no, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. Roth conversions aren't about converting because you can, they're about converting when your lifetime tax rate is lowest. I've referenced one of Edward McQuarrie's papers on Roth conversions and present value in another video, but he also did a paper in 2021, when and for whom are Roth conversions most beneficial. And his research concludes that the best conversion outcomes accrue when the conversion tax bracket is low in absolute terms. Typically, you can only do that when this 0% bracket is available to be filled along with those other lower brackets. And the research isn't saying that you have to have your tax brackets that low to have a good outcome, but it is saying the best outcomes come at that low rate. And why is that? Because the benefit is created by what we call tax rate arbitrage or tax bracket arbitrage, meaning the difference between that 8% effective tax rate in this case and that 32% that he was paying earlier. We want that window to be as wide as possible. That's where the benefits happen in conversions. And so that high tax bracket year mistake alone is expensive, but even worse is the next one I see more commonly, which is the lump sum conversion error that can trigger big tax bracket disasters. And so a lot of people will have questions or have the mindset of, well, I want to just rip the Band-Aid off and convert a huge chunk or even their entire IRA to Roth in 1 year. And I totally get where these questions are coming from. A giant 1-year Roth conversion can look and feel emotionally clean and decisive. And I've touched on the emotional angle before here with Roth conversions, how it's very important too. However, you don't want to just make an extreme emotional decision that's going to cause you financial harm or end up overpaying taxes that you don't need to. So when you do this mathematically, it forces way too much income into 1 calendar year, which triggers higher tax brackets, IRMA Medicare surcharges, sometimes state tax stacking. So if you live in a state where they tax IRA withdrawals, that could get progressively higher. When that happens, you're paying far more tax than you need to. You're voluntarily jumping into those higher brackets when you didn't have to. And remember, as I mentioned earlier, Roth conversion wins are about that tax rate arbitrage, not speed. So ideally, you want to convert money in the years where your marginal tax rate is temporarily low, not just all at once because it feels really good to get it all done with. And another question here is, well, won't investment growth make up for that large tax cost since it's now all growing tax free? I paid the cost and it was high, but now it's all tax free. So doesn't that win out? Well, that's the exact psychological trap here. So this is confusing tax free growth with tax free growth at any cost. And yes, Roth growth is tax free. That's correct. But if you have to pay 10, 15, 20% more in tax to get it in there, then that tax-free growth can't mathematically make up for all that overpayment. So simplifying this, if you can convert at 12% this year versus converting at 24 or 32% in another year, the Roth isn't going to grow any faster if you converted at 24 or 32%. You just paid more toll at the gate to get inside the same destination. So that's why we talk about arbitrage as the main benefit, not growth. The win is paying, let's say, 12% now instead of 22, 24, or 32% later. So the right question isn't, is tax-free growth good? The right question is, what is the cheapest, lowest tax rate I can access for this conversion? And let's look at a case example with two couples. So couple A, they did the rip the Band-Aid off approach. So they converted $500,000 all at once. So their taxable income jumped so high that they're forced deep into the 32% marginal bracket. So their marginal bracket is 32. Their effective rate that they actually pay is about 29%. So their total tax is around $146,000. So they basically just voluntarily moved into one of the most expensive tax years of their life just because they wanted it done. Essentially, sending the IRS way more taxes than they need to, wrapping it with a bow and saying, hey, Merry Christmas, here's overpayment in taxes. And now couple B, they did the same thing, but they did it over 5 years. So they converted $100,000 per year while controlling taxable income, so they stayed inside the lower bands. Most of it was all inside the 12%, little bit bled over into the 22% because they got some surprise income at the end of the year, but their effective rate was 11.8%. So their total tax over 5 years was a little bit over $59,000. And here's a quick breakdown of theirs. So they had about $31,500 in ordinary income. They did a $100,000 Roth conversion. So adjusted gross income, $131,500, standard deduction. Taxable income was $100,000. Just like the example we looked at with Bob, some is taxed at 10, some is taxed at 12, and just a little bit is taxed at 22. Again, they had a little bit of surprise income at the end of the year. So their effective rate is 11.8%, even though they're technically in the 22% marginal bracket. So again, we're looking at the effective tax rate here. So they kept everything inside those cheap zones and then repeated it. So same $500,000 ended up in the Roth, but at much lower cost. And the result here is an $87,000 difference between the two approaches, purely from timing and bracket strategy. That timing mistake didn't just cost them $87,000 in unnecessary taxes. If that was compounded at 7% for 20 years, for example, it cost them roughly $337,000 of future tax-free wealth that they'll never get back. And this is the real reason that most retirees should not be doing the rip the Band-Aid off approach. It's not Roth at any cost. It's converting at the right tax price on the way in. And now let's layer on the when, because the most valuable Roth years often arrive quietly, but then get missed. So now let's talk about the missed window opportunity that can waste some of those golden conversion periods. So as we saw above, the most powerful conversion window is after you retire, but before Social Security and RMDs come in. So these years can create your lowest lifetime brackets. And now this isn't the case for everybody. Some people might still be working part-time. Maybe they have pensions that they need to live off of, and that's going to take up a lot of that room. So again, Roth conversions are always very case by case. But assuming you do have that window to take advantage of, many people will wait and then miss it. And then once the brackets fill with required minimum distributions later, for example, then that window gets closed off. I will supplement this, though, with some important constraints that you want to weigh. So if you rely on Affordable Care Act coverage pre-Medicare and you're getting those ACA subsidies, preserving that subsidy can outweigh the benefits of doing a Roth conversion. So depending on your situation, it could make sense to keep your income low on purpose to take advantage of those subsidies. That's an example of where Roth conversions may not make sense for you. On the flip side, if you do have that full window, you have that standard deduction free space. So if your taxable income is low enough, like in the example we looked at with Bob, you can convert up to the standard deduction with zero federal tax. So that is a genuine potential tax-free conversion capacity that people miss. And of course, I do realize that this can be a harder circumstance to achieve for a lot of people. Going back to McQuarrie's research, he points out that unfortunately, under normal circumstances, very few affluent professional couples will have a year where they can fill the 0, 10, and 12 brackets with the conversion and still cover their living expenses. So again, this is all case by case, but this can be achieved with smart planning, with making use of non-retirement brokerage accounts and making sure you're intentionally planning this out in the years up to retirement. And so if this window is open for you, missing these several low bracket years often means paying 10% or more on later income. And when that window closes, you don't really get to opt out. The IRS is going to force income on top if you have IRAs. And now that takes me into the forced RMD trap that can lock you out of those low bracket conversions. And now I don't want to blow RMDs out of proportion because I think many can overestimate the taxes that they'll owe. So I'm going to break this down realistically without using any scare tactics like tax bombs and tax nightmares or anything like that. So it's true that once RMDs start, income starts to stack on top of Social Security, dividends, capital gains. All that can increase your tax bracket. However, in retirement, taxes work a little bit differently than most people think that they do or are prepared for. So for example, in your working years, all your deductions are getting saved at your top tax bracket. For example, at the 24% bracket, your 401k, your pre-tax 401k contributions, for example, come right off the top at 24%. In retirement though, income gets taxed from the bottom up, meaning it goes through all those lower brackets, just like Bob's example. So your effective tax rate is actually often lower than the 12 or 22% that you might expect to be in. So in that sense, I think that traditional IRA benefits are often very underrated in retirement. And that's why many people don't hit their feared tax bracket because they forget a couple things. Number one, that tax brackets actually inflate and grow larger every year, and that bottom-up taxation. So they'll think that because they're in a 22% tax bracket now, and they want to spend that same amount in the future, that they're going to be in 22%, but forget that the tax brackets inflate. So they may not actually be at 22% at that time if they're spending the exact same amount that they're spending now because of that tax bracket inflation. So because of this, some people will say, and there's other videos I've watched recently that say RMDs don't matter. It's kind of an overblown thing. And I agree to an extent. That's often very, very true for modest accounts where people will overestimate their future taxes. However, for large IRA or large pre-tax 401k households, and then considering 2 Social Security checks, maybe pension benefits, other income on top, RMDs absolutely do matter and will trigger higher tax brackets, IRMA, Medicare surcharges, and adding and factoring in that potential widow's tax trap and tax to your heirs as well. And so for that category, yes, RMDs arrive and stack income on top. And that stacking is why some other things, again, like I mentioned, IRMA can blindside people. That's added on to federal taxes. So if you're in that group, you don't want to miss the window before it's too late. This is when people contact me most often and say, hey, Justin, I had 2 years till RMDs and I just realized I'm going to get hit with a lot of these taxes. It's going to cost me the IRMA penalties and all these other things. But unfortunately, there's not as much that we can do at that time. And so bottom line, Roth conversion and Roth success here is more about timing. So let's summarize this all into a strategic timing framework that can optimize your conversion efficiency. And so to summarize, again, assuming that you are a good candidate for Roth conversions, you've already mapped out your why and how you want to do this. Number one is, of course, identifying those low income bridge years. And now there is a caveat to this too. Maybe you'd rather spend more money instead and enjoy experiences instead of saying, I have to save these windows for Roth conversions. Because I always like to throw out that saving taxes isn't the main goal of retirement. It's enjoying your money, using it to add value to your life. So that's what we want to have come first. But assuming that you can use these years, we want to take advantage of them. That's when you want to do the conversions. And then also, you want to fill your tax brackets methodically each year and don't just jump without purpose. So you want to try to capture those lowest effective tax rates that you can for, again, that maximum tax bracket arbitrage, that difference between the tax rates. Another thing I'll add is to be opportunistic if you can, if market dips happen. That's a really good time to do your conversions when you're doing this strategy. But I wouldn't delay your conversions trying to time the markets, because you could be delaying potentially for years, because nobody can really time the market effectively. But you want to preserve your optionality as tax laws and life circumstances change, and make sure that you have some flexibility built in there. So I'd say that Roth conversions can be incredibly powerful. I use them many times with clients where it's appropriate, and we've mapped out all the nuances here, but they're only powerful when the timing aligns with tax bracket arbitrage and your lifetime income sequencing. So, and of course, your personal goals. As I mentioned before, some people, this doesn't matter that much to them. So I don't want this video to try to convince you to do Roth if it's something that's just not really important to you, right? It needs to match up with your life as well. But I wouldn't let people convince you that you have to convert, even if it might be better for you not to. Again, that's a case-by-case evaluation. So if you're going to do this, if you're doing this on your own or you're working with somebody, you want to make sure you're understanding the tax sequencing and those effective tax rates, not just following advice that says Roth is good, traditional is bad. I wish it were that simple, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. And so if you add up all the avoidable tax and the future potential growth from either converting at the wrong rates, the lump sum mistake, the missed bridge year windows, not recognizing the forced RMD stacking on top of income, and potentially making these mistakes for multiple years, which some people do, unfortunately, you can see how in these cases, they gave up possibly far more than $800,000 in potential tax-free growth that should have been theirs, or that could have gone to their heirs as well. Not just from making one mistake, but from multiple timing errors that compounded on each other. So now that you understand a little bit more about the Roth timing trap and how poor timing, emotional decisions, and missed windows can eliminate a lot of those conversion benefits, hopefully you can implement some of this strategic timing and maximize your chance of success doing this. If you want help developing a comprehensive strategy, or if you're wondering, how does all this Roth stuff tie into me, or this seems complicated, I don't want to try to figure all this out myself, click the link in the description below the video. It'll take you to a quick questionnaire and also another video explaining my overall strategy, process, how I work with retirees. There'll also be a link there to book a call with me to see if we're a good fit to work together. If I can help, just let me know. Happy to do it. Thanks again for watching. As always, I appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one.